The skies over Veralia burned red as the warships of the Threx Dominion descended. Their voices, carried through the broadcast network, filled every corner of the planet with arrogance. They spoke in their sharp, guttural tongue, then repeated the words in trade language so all could understand. "Humans," the message declared, "you are nothing but evolved beasts. You have no place among the stars. Kneel, and we may spare your young." The message was meant to break spirits, but it only stirred something else in the hearts of those who heard it. Captain Elias Ward stood in the command chamber of the human flagship Resolute. Around him, officers exchanged tense glances, their faces pale from the threat that echoed across the fleet. Elias said nothing at first. His gaze remained fixed on the distant image of the enemy fleet, a shimmering cluster of steel and fire that blotted out the starlight. Then he spoke, voice calm but carrying a weight that silenced a room. "Beasts or not, we've never bowed to chains. And we won't start now." His words were not shouted, yet they seemed to spread like a spark through dry grass. The Threx had been the rulers of this sector for centuries. They had crushed worlds, erased cultures, and forced every species into servitude. They saw themselves as the peak of evolution, cold, perfect, and unyielding. To them, humanity's rise into the stars was an insult. Rumors said the Threx believed humans carried the blood of predators from some savage past. In their eyes, this made humanity unfit for diplomacy, unworthy of alliance. But they had made one fatal mistake. They thought that made humans weak. The first volley came without warning. The Dominion's rail cannons fired blazing slugs that tore through the outer human picket ships. The explosions lit the void, fragments spinning away into nothingness. Crew members aboard the Resolute gritted their teeth, gripping controls and bracing for impact. Elias watched the chaos on the holomap, his mind already racing. He knew the enemy was baiting them, trying to push them into a reckless charge. But humans had learned from predators long before they had learned from politics. On the surface of the nearby colony world, civilians huddled in shelters as the sky thundered with incoming fire. Among them was Dr. Mara Keene, a linguist and historian, who had studied the Threx for most of her life. She listened to the Dominion's broadcast with clenched fists, every word dripping with their contempt for humanity. Her mind turned over a thought she had carried for years, a truth about human origins the Threx would never accept. She whispered to herself, "They think beasts are something to be ashamed of." Then, as another distant explosion shook the ground, she smiled grimly. "Let's remind them why that's a mistake." Back in orbit, Elias ordered a sudden vector shift. The Resolute and her escorts began weaving through the debris of destroyed ships. It was a maneuver that seemed a desperate one the Threx expected from a cornered enemy. Their commanders laughed in private channels, their voices mocking. But Elias was guiding his fleet toward something else entirely, a hidden weapons platform. Buried in the shadow of a dead moon. The Dominion had dismissed it as scrap from an ancient war. They had no idea humans had rebuilt it in secret, arming it with weapons designed not for defense, but for a single overwhelming strike. The tension inside the command chamber grew heavier with each passing second. The enemy ships closed in, their energy signatures like bright spears against the darkness. Elias stood at the center console, his hand hovering over the command key. He could feel the weight of billions of lives pressing on his next choice. Then the enemy leader's voice cut through once more, dripping with condescension. "Tell us, human, what do you say to those who call you an animal?" Elias's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "We say this when the beast bares its teeth, even the hunter learns fear." The order was given. The shadowed moon lit up as ancient cannons roared to life, sending molten fire across the void. The first blast gutted a Threx battleship in a single hit. The second tore through their formation like claws through flesh. The Dominion's fleet faltered, their mocking voices falling silent as reality crashed in. And on the colony surface, Mara's voice joined the human broadcast, carried to every corner of the sector. She spoke in the Threx's own language, her words sharp and perfect. "If we are beasts," she said, "then you should have remembered beasts. Hunt. The Dominion's fleet was in chaos. Ships broke formation, trying to dodge the fiery rain unleashed from the hidden moon batteries. The void was filled with the soundless shockwaves of destruction hulks of Threx warships drifting, torn open like carcasses left for scavengers. The proud hunters of the stars now looked like prey caught in a sudden ambush. Elias didn't waste time celebrating. His voice was sharp and precise. "Push the line forward. Hit them where they're blind." His crew moved like clockwork, hands flying over controls, eyes locked on the carnage unfolding before them. In the Dominion's command ship, High Commander Krova's face twitched in fury. The broadcast from the human woman, her perfect pronunciation of their tongue had stung like a blade between the ribs. The Threx prided themselves on being the sole masters of language, of culture, of intellect. Yet here was a human, a so-called beast, speaking their words as if she had been born. To them. Krava slammed his clawed hand against the armrest, cracking the metal. "She mocks us," he hissed. "Kill her voice first. Then we tear out their hearts." His officers bowed, but their eyes showed something dangerous doubt. Mara stayed. In the underground command post, her hands steady on the comm console. Around her, military officers watched the enemy fleet scatter, disbelief mixing with awe. "They're not as invincible as they say," one whispered. Mara kept her gaze on the holo feed, tracking the patterns of retreat. She could see it, the cracks in their pride. She leaned into the microphone again, her voice low and calm. "You call us beasts because we remember what you've forgotten. We know hunger, we know fear, and we know how to make you feel both." The words spread through the human fleet like a silent promise. Elias's strategy was not about total annihilation. He knew the Threx would return with a vengeance if their pride was only wounded. He needed to break them completely, mind, spirit, and will. He ordered his strike craft to split into small, unpredictable packs, darting between enemy ships like predators circling their prey. Each hit was surgical, targeting engines, sensors, and communication relays. The Threx commanders could no longer coordinate, their once perfect unity unraveling in the dark. Every broken ship was not just a loss of firepower, it was another seed of fear planted. Deep in their ranks, on the colony world surface, civilians began emerging from the shelters as news spread of the sudden human pushback. The air still rumbled with distant fire, but hope moved through the streets like a current. Children clutched their parents' hands, eyes wide with the strange mix of fear and pride. Among them, an old man looked up at the sky and muttered, "They thought we came from beasts. Maybe that's why we fight like this." His words found their way to a young soldier nearby, who repeated them into his helmet's mic. Within minutes, the phrase was rippling through human comm channels, becoming a battle cry. The Threx still had numbers, but numbers meant nothing if their unity collapsed. On their bridge, Krava bared his teeth in frustration. His advisors urged a tactical retreat, warning that further losses would embolden not just humans, but every species under Dominion rule. But Krava's pride was a chain around his neck. "We do not flee from animals," he snarled. Yet his own crew avoided his gaze, their hands hesitating over controls. In their minds, a new and dangerous thought had taken root. Perhaps the humans were not prey after all. Perhaps the hunters had misjudged their place in the food chain. Back aboard the Resolute, Elias stood silent for a moment, watching the enemy falter. He understood the importance of this moment. It was not just a battle, but a turning point in the war. His mind went back to the insult that had started it all, the claim that humans were nothing more than evolved predators. He almost laughed. Let them call us beasts, he thought. Beasts survive. Beasts adapt. Beasts win. Then, without turning, he gave the next order. bring this second wave forward. It's time they learned how dangerous a cornered animal can be. The second wave hit like a storm. Human ships surged forward, weaving through the debris field with impossible agility. The Threx fleet tried to reform, but every time they gathered in clusters, precision strikes tore them apart. Small fighter squadrons harassed the flanks, cutting supply lines before the Dominion even realized they were under attack. In the chaos, the once terrifying Threx war horns were silent. The void was now filled only with the roar of human weapons and the sudden, fearful chatter of an enemy that had never been hunted before. High Commander Krova's control was slipping. His orders came out sharp, but the timing was wrong, the targets meaningless. The Dominion had never fought an enemy that refused to stand in neat lines. Humans fought like predators in the wild, circling, waiting, striking at weakness instead of strength. Every time Krova tried to counterattack, his forces found nothing but empty space, as if the humans had vanished, only to reappear with claws. Bared, pride was no longer his weapon. It had become his blindfold. Mara's voice returned to the open channel, smooth and unshaken. She did not shout. She spoke as if delivering a fact, something inevitable. "The difference between you and us," she said, "is that you believe beasts are beneath you. We remember that the beast survives when the proud fall." Her words were translated instantly into dozens of Dominion languages, reaching the ears of alien species who had lived under Threx rule for generations. On far-off worlds, silent listeners began to hope, and to wonder if the humans might be the ones to finally break the chain. On the Resolute, Elias listened to the incoming reports. Enemy cruisers were falling back. Their capital ships, the pride of the Threx Navy, were now shielding themselves instead of advancing. This was more than victory, it was humiliation for an empire that had built itself on dominance. He glanced at the tactical display, noting the positions of his ships and the enemy's retreat corridors. "Don't let them escape clean," he said. "Mark them. Let the scars remind them who they tried to break." Missiles streaked out, not to destroy, but to cripple, leaving wrecks limping away for all the galaxy to see. In the Dominion flagship, Krava's claws dug deep grooves into the command chair. Every instinct told him to fight to the last, but another voice whispered of survival. Retreat was unthinkable for a Threx commander, but the alternative was to be remembered as the leader who lost the unlosable war. Around him, the crew shifted uneasily, their eyes flicking to the exits. Krava's pride battled his fear, but the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The humans were no longer prey. They were something worse. They were predators who had learned patience. On the colony surface, soldiers and civilians alike were watching live feeds of the battle. The sight of the Dominion ships turning away sent waves of emotion through the crowd. Children cheered. Elders stood straighter. And Mara, still seated at the station, knew this was only the beginning. She sent one final message to the Threx fleet before they vanished into warp. "Remember this day," she said. "You tried to strip us of our place among the stars. Instead, you reminded us how to take it back." Her voice carried not just through the battlefield, but across the sector, seeding defiance in hearts that had known only fear. The Resolute drifted through the quiet left behind. Fires burned in the wreckage of both human and Threx ships, but the field was theirs. Elias allowed himself a slow breath, his hand tightening briefly on the console. This was one battle in a larger war, but something fundamental had changed. The Dominion now knew the truth. The humans they mocked as beasts had not forgotten their origins. And in the deep, unspoken language of survival, that made them more dangerous than the Threx had ever imagined. The days after the battle were filled with movement. Human fleets repositioned, securing the colony and guarding the vital trade routes nearby. The victory had sent shockwaves through the sector. and reports were already coming in from distant world species long under Threx control were beginning to test the limits of their chains. Skirmishes broke out in the outer systems, small uprisings sparked by the whispers of what humanity had done. The Threx still held power, but the cracks in their empire were spreading faster than they could seal them. Elias stood on the Resolute's bridge, reviewing the flood of intelligence. Reports. Every new transmission confirmed what he already suspected. The Dominion would not accept the humiliation quietly. They were regrouping, gathering reinforcements from their core worlds. The next strike would be larger, sharper, and aimed not just at military targets, but at breaking humanity's will. Elias knew the Threx would rather scorch a planet than allow it to become a symbol of resistance. His orders to the fleet were clear: prepare for a storm. Meanwhile, in the underground command post, Mara worked tirelessly. Her broadcasts from the battle had become a rallying cry, replayed by resistance groups across dozens of worlds. But she also knew her words had painted a target on her back. Threx propaganda channels now carried her name, branding her the mouth of the beast, and promising a bounty for her capture. Her colleagues urged her to go into hiding, but she refused. "If I hide, I prove them right," she told them. A voice is only powerful if it's heard, even when danger comes. Her calm resolve unsettled those around her. It was the same kind of calm they'd seen in the eyes of predators. In the Threx High Command, Krava stood before the Council of War. His report on the battle was blunt, but not complete. He did not speak of the fear that had gripped his crew, nor of the hesitation in his own heart. He claimed tactical error, poor positioning, and sabotage from within. The council listened, their faces carved from stone. But the unspoken truth hung in the air. They all knew the humans had struck at the Dominion's pride. And pride was the one thing the Threx could not afford to lose. Retaliation was ordered. Not for territory, but for vengeance. Far from the fleet, on a neutral trading station, quiet deals were being made. Smugglers, mercenaries, and exiled captains whispered over dimly lit tables about the humans. Some spoke of fear, warning that the Threx would come down on them all if they offered help. Others, though, saw opportunity. If humanity could stand against the Dominion, perhaps they could shift the balance of the galaxy. The station's message relays began carrying coded signals toward human space, offers of weapons, ships, and information. The Beasts of Defiance was drawing allies from the shadows. Back aboard the Resolute, Elias met with Mara in the strategy chamber. The room was dim, lit only by the glowing star maps and tactical grids. "We can win battles," he told her, "but the Threx control the story. They decide what the galaxy believes." Mara's answer was immediate. "Then we take that from them too." Her eyes locked on his, steady and certain. "They say we came from beasts. We make the galaxy see why. That's the reason they should fear us." The silence that followed was heavy not from doubt, but from the weight of the path ahead. Beyond the cold metal walls of the flagship, the stars waited. Somewhere in that endless dark, the Dominion was gathering for their strike. But humanity was not waiting to be hunted again. Their fleets moved quietly, their allies spread messages in secret, and their leaders sharpened the one truth the Threx had never understood, that survival was not shame, and that in the end, it was the predator, not the proud, who endured. The Dominion returned without warning. The first sign was the sudden blackout of long-range comms. Then came the deep space warning buoys, transmitting only seconds of static before falling silent. On the Resolute, Elias watched the tactical feed flare with new signatures, dozens of Threx warships dropping out of warp in tight formation. They had learned from their last defeat. This time, their movements were precise, disciplined, and aimed directly at the colony world. The beast had drawn blood, and now the hunters were coming to finish the kill. In the command post, Mara felt the tremors as the first orbital strikes hit. Dust drifted from the ceiling, and the low rumble of distant impacts became a steady drumbeat. Officers scrambled to relay orders, but every line out of the colony was jammed. She knew what the Threx wanted. They were not here to occupy, but to erase. Her broadcasts had become a symbol, and symbols were dangerous. She adjusted the comms manually, searching for any open channel, her voice steady even as the walls shook. "This is Mara Keene to all human forces. You know what they think of us. Prove them wrong." In space, the human fleet formed a wall between the Dominion and the planet. The Resolute was at the center, its shields glowing from repeated hits. Elias ordered his ships into layered formations, forcing the Threx to split their fire. Every move was a gamble. The enemy's new tactics left no easy openings. Human pilots fought with the ferocity of survival, but each casualty tore at the thin line holding the Dominion back. Through it all, Elias's voice stayed calm, each order measured, as if daring the enemy to believe he had not yet begun to fight. Crava was aboard the Dominion's lead dreadnought, his eyes locked on the image of the human flagship. This time, there would be no retreat. He had demanded command of the assault, promising the council he would bring back Elias Ward's head in the silenced voice of Mara Keene. His pride burned hotter than his hatred. "We end them here," he growled to his crew. But somewhere beneath that rage, a cold memory whispered, the moment his fleet had broken under human claws. He buried it quickly, unwilling to admit that it still haunted him. The battle grew darker as the Threx unleashed new weapons ion bursts that disabled human systems. Swarms of guided micro-missiles that slipped past defenses. Several smaller human ships were torn apart, their fragments spinning into the void. Yet even in loss, humanity struck back hard. Disabled vessels rammed enemy cruisers. Fighters lured larger ships into crossfire. And Mara's voice continued to slip into Threx channels, disrupting their commands. She never raised her tone, but every word carried defiance. "You think beasts only run. Watch how we hunt when cornered." On the colony surface, the civilians refused to cower. Makeshift defense lines sprang up in the streets, manned by soldiers and miners alike. Children carried water and supplies to the wounded. And old hunters from the wilderness joined the fight with weapons older than the war itself. They fought not because they thought they could win against an empire, but because they understood something deeper. Survival was not always about strength. Sometimes it was about refusing to fall even when the blow came. As the hours dragged on, the battlefield tilted on a knife's edge. The human fleet was bloodied, but the Dominion had not broken through. Elias stood at the heart of it all, watching patterns form in the chaos. His eyes narrowed. There a gap in the enemy formation. A ripple caused by their own aggressive push. It was small, dangerous, and would require every remaining ship to commit at once. He opened a channel to all human forces. "They said we came from beasts," he said. "Let's show them what happens when the beast takes the throat." Asterisk. The order went out, and the human fleet moved as one. Ships peeled from defensive positions, surging through the gap Elias had spotted. Fighters screamed ahead, cutting apart the enemy's escort lines before they could react. Heavy cruisers followed close, pouring fire into the exposed side of the Dominion's formation. The sudden shift caught the Threx completely off guard. They had expected the humans to hold the line, not to lunge like predators smelling blood. In seconds, the balance of the battle tipped. Crava roared orders, trying to pull his fleet back into position, but it was too late. Human ships darted between his larger vessels, striking at their engines and drives. One by one, Threx warships went dark, drifting helplessly in space. The gap widened, and the Resolute charged through, its guns blazing. Crava's dreadnought shook under the pounding fire. His bridge crew shouted warnings, but his pride chained him to the command chair. The humiliation of another retreat was unthinkable. He would rather die than see humans claim another victory. On the colony surface, The defenders saw the sky light up as burning enemy ships fell through the atmosphere. The ground shook with each crash, but the cheers grew louder. Mara's voice filled every working speaker, every helmet. "Come. They wanted us to fear the hunter," she said. "But the hunter fears the beast that fights back." Her words carried across the battlefield, cutting through the smoke and the chaos. Even wounded soldiers pushed themselves back to their feet, as if the sound alone kept them standing. The Resolute closed on Krava's flagship. Elias's voice was steady as he gave the final command. "Lock all forward batteries, end it." The human guns roared in unison, smashing through the dreadnought's shields. Armor tore, fires erupted, and the Dominion's most feared warship split apart under the assault. As the vessel broke, Krava stood for a moment, staring at the view beyond the shattered hull. Human ships surrounding him, their weapons glowing like the eyes of predators in the dark. For the first time in his life, he understood the fear prey must feel. When the wreckage finally drifted silent, the battle was over. The Dominion fleet was gone, shattered or fled, and the colony stood free. Across the sector, the news spread faster than any order the Threx could give. Species long silent under their rule began to rise, their voices echoing the same truth: humanity had faced the Empire and survived. Not by denying their nature, but by embracing it. In that, they had found the strength to fight on ground the Threx could not control. Elias stood on the Resolute's bridge, the stars stretching endlessly before him. Around him, the crew was weary but alive. He thought of the insult that had started this war. The words meant to cut deep. Humans were nothing but beasts. Now those words felt different. They were a badge, a reminder, and a warning. He opened a sector-wide broadcast, his voice carrying to friend and enemy alike. "You called us beasts," he said. "You were right. And the beasts will never kneel." In the quiet that followed, the human fleet began its slow return. The war was not over, but something far greater had been won. The galaxy had seen what happened when humanity's pride was challenged, when its survival was threatened. And from that day forward, the Dominion's name no longer brought fear to human worlds. Instead, it was the Threx who whispered of the creatures they had tried to cage, and of the day those creatures bared their teeth and changed the fate of the stars.